I'm Anna,
I'm Jessica.
and this is the Paranoia Pair. I did um the wheel, like how you can generate a wheel and then you like
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't pick what topic I wanted to do today, so I just put them all on a wheel and I had it pick for me. So
The Somerton Man?
the Somerton Man. Yes.
Somer.
It's also known as the Tamim Shud case. On December 1st, 1948, at 6:30 in the morning, a man was found on Somerton Park Beach in South Australia. His body was positioned so his legs were outstretched and his feet were crossed. So kind of like how you're sitting right now, kind of like a relaxed state. Someone came by to see if he was okay. When he didn't see him breathing, him and his friend grabbed the man's legs to kind of maybe wake him up, but they discovered that he was dead.
Jesus.
Um, and he was wearing a button-down white shirt, a red, white, and blue tie, brown trousers, socks, and nice black polished shoes.
Was he American?
We will get into it.
Okay.
Actually.
Because what country would wear red, white, and blue
Right.
ties?
He was also wearing a knit pullover and a brown suit jacket. So what was kind of odd was the weather was pretty warm.
I was going to say
and
that
he is wearing a lot of layers.
that sounds weird for Australia.
Mm-hmm. He also had a half-smoked cigarette on his lapel, and a lapel is like that folded piece of cloth that men will tuck into their like suit jacket pockets.
You mean the tissue?
Yeah,
Like the handkerchief?
Yeah. So it was thought that he could be around in his 40s or 50s, and he was also clean shaven. Nobody really knew who he was, and they obviously didn't know where he came from, because he was just dead on the beach. But police came and they examined his body. There was no obvious causes of death, so he didn't have like bruising or like any visible wounds. They searched his items and clothing for any hints about where they were purchased or like any kind of clues about maybe who he was or where he came from. But unfortunately, all the tags and the labels had been removed.
That's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
They did, however, find an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach. They found a bus ticket to St. Leonard's for 11:15 a.m., a U.S. manufactured aluminum comb, and half empty packet of juicy fruit. I loved that gum.
What year was this? Oh, never mind. I was thinking of Gushers.
1948.
Okay, I was thinking of Gushers.
They also found an Army Club cigarette packet, but it had 7 cigarettes of a different brand. And I did look up Army Club cigarette packets, and they did make tins, but they also had just like the normal like cardboard boxes. Since they didn't specify that it was a tin, I'm just assuming it was the normal like cigarette box. And then it just had just different cigarettes stuffed inside. He also had a box of Bryant and May matches that was almost empty. Police suspected that he may have missed his train for Henley Beach and that he had just gone to the beach so he could lay down and like rest a bit until the next train arrived because he had he was found at 6:30, so he had a while. There were witnesses who said they seen a man who resembled him on the beach on November 30th near the handicapped children's home. So where the man was found was by the sea wall next to some steps, and if you went up those steps, on the other side of the street was the handicapped children's home. There was a couple who said they seen him around 7 p.m. They said that he had extended his right arm and kind of dropped it like limp, which they thought was kind of weird. There was another couple who saw him about 7:30 to 8 p.m. and they didn't see him moving, but they did believe that he was kind of switching his positions a little bit. They thought it was kind of weird that he didn't seem to be bothered by the mosquitoes that had. They just sort of chalked it up to maybe he was just like drunk or asleep.
You're going to wake up if you're asleep and mosquitoes are getting you.
Yeah. There was also another witness who told police that she had seen a man that was looking down at what they're calling sleeping man from the top of the steps. that led to the beach. It was suspected that his time of death was around 2 a.m. on December 1st. And when police found the body, it was stiff and cold. He was declared dead at 7:45 a.m. at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, which was almost 7 miles away from Somerton Park Beach, where he was found. In his stomach, they found lumps of potatoes, which means that he died relatively soon after he ate. He was white. He appeared to be European between the ages of 40 to 45. In the autopsy, they noted that he was in top physical condition, but he was a heavy smoker. He was around 5'11" and he had gray eyes. He was missing a few teeth and he had a light ginger type hair color and he was starting to gray around the temples. His hair was long enough that he had slicked it back and that was at the time really common in American or British. So that's kind of what maybe they're thinking of his nationality or where he came from.
The tie's not doing it for him?
No, it wasn't the tie. His hands and nails showed that he didn't do any manual labor. They noted that he had pronounced high calf muscles.
Dang.
So that was really consistent with people who wear boots or shoes with high heels
Oh.
and people who do ballet. So
Oh.
like a heeled like work boot or something. So there was no damage to his heart, but his brain did show it had some damage. He also had congestion of the pharynx, which is part of the throat that's behind the mouth and the nasal cavity. It's also above the esophagus, so it's kind of like right here.
So it's you right now.
Yes.
Con-
I'm very nasally congested. His esophagus was covered with superficial layers of mucus, and it had an ulceration in the middle of it. Reports say that he had a congested stomach, and I was like, "What the hell does that mean?" So it means that it was swollen and it had like blood vessels in the stomach lining, and this can lead to frequent bruising of the stomach and even like cause bleeding. His small intestine was also congested. Apparently, there was blood present with the food in his stomach.
but what
So,
causes the congestion in the stomach and intestines?
um,
Like a big object?
well, I'm kind of gonna get into that a tiny little bit. So both of his kidneys were also congested, which makes it hard for the blood flow to the renal veins. So this can all result from heart, liver, or kidney disease or certain medication, but nothing of this nature was mentioned in the reports. So his liver did contain excess blood. His spleen was about 3 times its normal size, and there was also destruction of the center of the liver lobules that was revealed under the microscope. His last meal was a pastry that had some meat and potatoes inside of it. They had suspected that he had eaten it around 3 to 4 hours before his death, so they suspected that he died about 2 a.m. They did test for common poisons and other foreign substances of the body. They didn't find anything in the results, though. They did believe that there was a drug involved in poisoning that was suspected to be his cause of death. So they believe that the pastry the man had eaten was not the source of poison, I guess. In the report, it's written that they think it's likely that whatever he took was taken perhaps minutes before he arrived at the steps on the beach. The drug began to make him drowsy, so he went to find a spot to lay down. But by the time he made it on the beach, he was too drowsy to go any further, so he just kind of laid his head back and lit a cigarette. The cigarette did go out before he could finish it and fell onto his lapel. So there were no signs of skin or burn marks on the lapel, which did support this theory. They did exclude ordinary barbiturates, alkaloids, and arsenic from the list of poisons that he could have taken. There was no sign of convulsions or that there was a struggle because of the poison. They didn't see any presence of puncture marks where the poison could have been injected, but sometimes it's really hard to identify those marks because they can be so small. Hydrogen cyanide and other cyanides kill very fast, so the bottle couldn't really have been thrown away if he did do it himself. Like, it's so fast acting that he wouldn't really have time to throw it away.
That's crazy.
They did search to see if maybe they could find a bottle or container, but they didn't find anything. And like I said earlier, there was no sign of ordinary poisons ordinary poisons in his system. Despite that, they concluded that he must have had special information that made him choose a poison that was so hard to detect. They think he got his information from possibly working in the medical field, or maybe he was a chemist, maybe he had scientific training, or he got an idea from reading a book. One of the pathologists said, "I'm quite convinced the death could not have been natural. The poison I suggested was a barbiturate or a soluble hypnotic." So they are like really hard on like, we are pretty sure this is poisoning, but we just can't figure out which one. So like when they do, when you think of like toxicology reports done, it's just like basic because I mean, if they're pretty common, they're gonna have like easy access to them. So it's just easier to run through those first because it's more than likely one of those. But since it's so specific, they have to like really be like picking and choosing and testing individually, I
Okay.
guess.
So it's kind of a hassle.
Kinda, yeah. So a month after, there was a suitcase that was found in the coat room of the Adelaide railway station. The suitcase had been checked in the day before the Somerton man's body was discovered. The police did suspect that it belonged to him. Inside were shaving items, a screwdriver, a table knife, a pair of scissors, a square of zinc, and a stenciling brush. There were also clothing that was found inside, and those labels had also been removed.
So maybe he was like neurodivergent.
Mm, maybe. They also found a waxed thread that was not sold in Australia. So, this was the same kind of thread that was used to repair the man's trousers he was found wearing. The clothes were also made consistent with how American clothings were manufactured.
I knew it.
There were the names Keen, Kean, and Kean, Keane, written on multiple items in the suitcase. The suitcase is being described as like practically new with very few scratches, so it had just been recently purchased. The police thought that whoever removed the tags from the clothes either purposely left the names that were on the clothes, knowing that was not the identified man's name, or they possibly overlooked it. Um, So they were still in a time period where they were rationing because of the war. So clothing was pretty difficult to come by at the time. So it was pretty common like to use name tags on your clothes. But it was also really normal to buy like secondhand clothing at like thrift stores and like garage sales and stuff
They had those back then?
and like hand me downs. Yeah.
Okay.
There were slippers inside the suitcase that were a bit smaller than the shoe size that the man was wearing. There was airmail stickers in the suitcase, which indicated that he was probably communicating with someone from overseas. He did have a small scar on his left shoulder. They suspected it was from a vaccination scar, which is consistent with the vaccination scars you see on service members. Um, like this,
How big are these
I'm
scars?
gonna tell you, it's like this big, and it's from the smallpox
How big
vaccination.
was the needle?
Uh, I don't wanna know, but, my husband has one from his smallpox vaccination that he had to get.
Ask him how big was the.
And they also have these, shots, they call them peanut butter shots because they're so thick. Because they mix all of the vaccinations together, it's like a whole bunch of different vaccinations, and then they inject them into you.
Oh
And you also get anthrax vaccinations as well.
my
So they're
god.
thinking he has this scar, so probably military. Inside of his trouser pocket, there was a small money pocket. 'Cause apparently that's what that little pocket is on your pants. Because there's, like, your regular pocket and there's, like, a tiny pocket. Inside of that little pocket was a piece of paper, and in Farsi, it said "Tamam shud," which in English means "it is finished."
Oh, I thought that was the name. I thought there was gonna be an ending to this story because I thought he had a name. And I was like, "Oh, this isn't gonna be a mystery that's unsolved."
So this, phrase was actually torn out of a poetry book called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. They began thinking about the possibility of this man committing suicide. Um, they suspect that he had served in the army, either British or United States, and that he obviously knew Turkish or Arabic. This opened up the possibility of maybe he had been stationed in the Middle East long enough to learn that language. Nothing else was found in the pockets, though, and there wasn't even like any money or anything else, just that paper with the phrase. Police did send out the man's fingerprints around the world, but nobody could identify him. They found the name T. Kean on a laundry bag in the suitcase. This prompted them to look into see if there was any kind of missing person in an English-speaking country, but there were no hits. They believed he had arrived at the Adelaide railway station from an overnight train from either Melbourne, Sydney, or Port Augusta, so they checked the incoming train records. They also believed that he showered and shaved at one of the close-by city baths before he got to the train station and purchased his ticket to the Henley Beach. So city baths is actually a swimming pool and not a public bathing facility.
I was like, Australia had those?
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, that's, like, kind of cool and, like,
'Cause
progressive."
you really kinda hear about that, like, in, like, Asian countries, like Japan,
Yeah.
with, like, bathhouses, and I was like,
Mhm.
I didn't know
Yeah,
Australia had those.
apparently it was just a swimming pool.
That makes sense.
So, um, he did, however, check his suitcase at the, station coat room and then left to catch a city bus to Glenburg immediately after. Police asked the public to help find the book, which had been, torn. A businessman had actually come forward with a matching copy of the book, and the book had been found in the back of his car around the same time and close to where the Somerton man's body was found. And the poem reads, "Love, could thou and I with fate conspire to grasp the scheme of things entire? Would not we shatter it to bits and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire? Ah, moon of my delight, who know'st no wane, the moon of heaven is rising once again. How oft hereafter rising shall she look through this same garden after me in vain? And when thyself with shining foot shall pass among the guests, star scattered on the grass, and in the joyous errand reach the spot where I made one turn down an empty glass, Temem should." So the theme of this is basically that you should live life to the fullest and that you should not have any regrets of where your life ends. So the book held other clues though. In the back of the book, there was a telephone number and a sequence of letters that were fairly indented, so they were written with some pressure. The sequence of numbers have been seen as a type of code, and that also led to speculation that the unidentified man was possibly a Cold War spy.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So there were efforts to decode its meaning, whether or not they have one. There had been no successful attempts. The phone number in the back of the book belonged to a woman called Jessica Thompson. She was a nurse who lived fairly close to where they found the unidentified man's body. When police spoke to her in July of 1949, she denied knowing him. Police did take her to look at a plaster bust of the man's head and shoulders. They made this in hopes that it would help trigger some kind of memory she may have. So it was reported that she did kind of behave strange when she saw it, but there was never any reason why. Jessica did have a son named Robin, and it was suggested that Robin was the biological son of the unidentified man.
Did they take his DNA?
They did not. People did point out physical characteristics they had in common, including their teeth and their ears, which your ears are very, very unique.
I didn't think you could really inherit your teeth from your parents.
It was believed that Jessica Thompson may have had a relationship with the Somerton man. Now, Jessica did tell police that at some time in late 1948, an identified man had attempted to visit her and even asked one of her next door neighbors about her. There was a man named Gary Feltus who wrote a book about the case, and he interviewed Thompson in 2002. He felt that she was either being evasive or she just didn't want to talk about it, but he truly thought she knew the Somerton man's identity. In fact, Thompson's daughter Kate said in a TV interview in 2014 that she believed her mother knew the dead man. Harry Feltis also thought the final line of the code ITTMTSAMSTGAB could be initials for the sentence, "It's time to move to South Australia, Mosley Street." I don't know what AB stands for. Anyway.
I'm not a crime solver, I'm a crime
No.
reporter.
Hardly even that. I barely know how to read. So, Thompson was a former nurse who lived on Mosley Street, and it's a main road through Glenlig, um, which I'm assuming is what the G stands for. I still don't know what AB stands for. I'm just gonna skip over it. So, Thompson said herself that while she was working at the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney during World War II, she had owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. In 1945, at the Clifton Gardens Hotel in Sydney, she had given it to an army lieutenant named Alf Boxall, and he was serving in the water transportation section of the Royal Australian Engineers. After the war had ended, though, she had moved to Melbourne and got married. She had received a letter from Boxall and had replied telling him that she was now married. I'm assuming they were like hot and heavy. And he was like, "Can't get you off my mind, girl." She's like, "Actually,
I got you off my mind.
I'm actually married." So there was no evidence, though, that Boxall had any contact with her after 1945. Police suspected that the dead man found on Somerton Beach was Boxall. That theory died, though, in July 1949 when Boxall was found in Sydney, Australia.
Did he
And
move on and get married?
I actually have no clue. I'm so
Okay.
sorry. So he did have the final copy. He did have his Rubaiyat that she had given him, and it was all intact with the phrase "Tamam Shud" still intact. Womp womp. So the unidentified man was buried in the Adelaide Cemetery in 1949 with a tombstone that reads, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton's Beach, December 1st, 1940. The South Australian Grand Standard Bookmakers Association had paid for the service, which I think is really sweet.
Yeah.
Because there's so many stories of people who are just like unidentified. They have like nobody like who is coming to claim them, and then they don't get the proper burial they deserve. So, years after the burial, flowers began appearing on the grave site. And so police questioned a woman they found who was leaving them behind, and she claims she knew nothing of the man. So, at about the same time the Somerton man was found, Ina Harvey, who was a receptionist from the Strathmore Hotel, revealed that a strange man had stayed in room 21 or 23 for a few days around the time of the death. He had checked out on November 30th, 1948. She stated that he was English speaking and only carried a small black suitcase similar to one a musician or a doctor might carry. An employee looked inside the suitcase and he told Harvey that he had found an object inside that looked like a needle.
Just the needle?
Yeah. Apparently. And why are you looking in this man's belongings?
I'm pretty nosy. I would do it if I could.
There have been several false identifications of the body over the years. These identifications include two men who thought the body was a friend of theirs, another who thought it was a missing station worker or maybe even a Swedish man, shipmates of a seaman named Tommy Reed from the SS Cycle, that was ported around the time. He was thought to be the dead man. But after they went and viewed the body, they stated it didn't resemble Tommy at all. In July 2010, Derek Abbott was committed to identifying the man. He got a hold of a photograph of Jessica Thompson's son, Robin. The photograph showed that he had similar ears and he also had hypodontia. And hypodontia is a hereditary condition and it causes infants to be born with 1 to 6 missing teeth. So dental experts concluded that the Somerton man had hypodontia. The chance that this was a coincidence is between 10 to 20 million.
Damn.
So very, very, very uncommon, and it's only hereditary. Robin unfortunately passed away in 2009 and was cremated, though. So it's still speculated at the time that he may have been a child of either Alf Boxall or the Somerton Man and was passed off as Jessica's husband, Prosper Thompson's son. In 2011, an Adelaide woman contacted Macy Henberg, who was a biological anthropologist, about an identification card she found in her father's possession. The identification card was issued in the United States to a foreign seaman during World War I. There were similarities in the features like the nose, the lips, and eyes and ears. There was also a mole that was in the same shape and position in both photographs. The ID card was issued in the United States on February 28th of 1918 to H.C. Reynolds. His nationality was labeled British, and his age was 18. And the searches done by the U.S. National Archives, the U.K. National Archives, and the Australian War Memorial Research Centre all failed to find any records relating to an H.C. Reynolds. In July of 2013, Derek Abbott released an artistic impression that he commissioned for the Somerton Man. He believed this might actually lead to a positive identification. In December of 2017, 3 hairs had been found on the plaster cast of the corpse. They had been submitted for analysis to the Australian Centre of Ancient DNA at the University of Adelaide. In February 2018, the university team obtained a high-definition analysis of mitochondrial DNA from the hair samples from the Somerton Man. They found that he and his mother belonged to a haplogroup, which was possessed by only 1% of Europeans. So it's like some kind of part of their DNA, basically,
Okay.
is like linked to a very, very small percentage of people. Kate Thompson is interviewed for 60 Minutes in Australia. She says that her mother admitted to her that she knew who the Somerton Man was. So this is Jessica Thompson's daughter. She was not going to disclose his identity, though. Kate believes that her mother was a Soviet spy. Her mother, Jessica, taught English to immigrants. She was interested in communism. She could speak Russian, although she did not tell her daughter where she learned it or why. And she also believed that her mother was having an affair with the Somerton Man, who possibly may have also been a spy.
That's a crazy thing to say about your mom.
Mm-hmm.
Who I'm assuming is dead at this point.
So Robin Thompson's widow, Roma Egan, and their daughter, Rachel Egan, also were in that interview, and they said they believed the Somerton Man was Robin's father. Both Roma and Rachel put an application in with the Attorney General of South Australia to have the Somerton Man's body exhumed so DNA testing could be done. Derek Abbott also wrote to the Attorney General of South Australia and supported the Egans, saying that the DNA testing would be consistent with federal government policy of identifying soldiers in war graves. So Kate, however, opposed the exhumation because she said it was disrespectful. And this is the lady who is saying, my mom told me.
It's disrespectful to take people out of the grave. Also, my dead mom's a spy.
Yeah. So when asked what Roma and Rachel thought about Kate's objections, they were honestly really understanding of seeing her side of things, and they were very respectful. And I love that because, like, a lot of the times when there's like 2 opposing sides, I feel like there's always like a lot of hatred. But like it wasn't this way, but like they seemed like really, honestly, really, really nice. In October of 2019, the Australian Attorney General signed off on the Somerton Man's body to be exhumed by the University of Adelaide professor Derek Abbott. Derek Abbott had been trying to solve the mystery for more than a decade, and his research led him to meet Rachel Egan, who he believes is the Somerton Man's granddaughter. So Rachel said that when she first met the professor, he wanted to look at her ears and teeth, and he wanted a sample of her DNA. First meeting. Show me ears, teeth. Can you give me your DNA? Okay. This is where things get crazy in the story, like a little bit, as if they weren't all crazy already. So Derek and Rachel actually get married. They marry each other. He proposed to her days after they met.
That's weird.
Yeah, Roma believed that he only did this to get access to her DNA. So Rachel actually thinks there's probably some truth to that. And I'm just like, how what's your marriage like?
Coulda just, like, gave her a glass of water and took it home with you.
Right? So Roma and Rachel's relationship kind of dissolves because of Derek and Rachel's continued relationship. So they kind of like fizzled out a little bit. May 18th, 2021, the South Australian police exhumed the Somerton man's body. They were worried that if they waited another decade, that non-chromosome DNA would deteriorate enough to where they no longer would be able to identify him. Technology had also improved enough that it could be possible to give the experts the best chance to identify him through his DNA and possibly establish a cause of death. It was a 12-hour process, and they used a small excavator and an earth remover. Then they used a wooden spatula and a small brush to carefully remove the bones from the ground. So the remains were placed inside of a new coffin, which I think is very nice. In July 2020, Derek Abbott named the Somerton Man as Carl Charles Webb, a 43-year-old electrical engineer from Melbourne. So, Derek Abbott worked with an American genealogist named Colleen Fitzpatrick, who was the founder of Identifiers International. And Identifiers International is a genealogical research agency. Abbott and Fitzpatrick built a family tree of about 4,000 names that led back to Charles, whose death date had not been recorded. So he had basically seemingly disappeared. They actually matched the DNA obtained from the hair to a DNA test taken by Charles Webb's distant relatives. They said we looked for people with no date of death. There was one that stood out because he was male. He was roughly the right age, and he was very closely connected to the Kean family. And the Somerton man had the name Kean on his tie. Charles Webb was born November 16th, 1905, in Footscray. And Footscray is a suburb of Melbourne. He was the youngest of 6 siblings, and he grew up and later married Dorothy Robertson in 1941, and they did not have any children. When Abbott and Fitzgerald checked public records to see if they could get more information about him, unfortunately, there wasn't really any photos in the public records. So the last known record of Charles Webb was in 1947 when he left his wife Dorothy. He had disappeared and she went to court saying that he had vanished and that she wanted a divorce. So Dorothy ended up moving to Butte, South Australia, which is about 89 miles northeast of Adelaide. And Abbott speculates that Charles might have been going to this area, possibly trying to find Dorothy, although they can't say for certain that this was the reason why, but it's plausible enough. They also find out that he liked betting on horses, which could explain the code of letters they found in the book, possibly being tied to names of horses because they have those really wild long names. After finding a positive match with the members of the Webb family, they had put their family tree on the genealogical website. Professor Abbott contacted Stuart Webb, who he believed was the great grandson of the Somerton man's brother. And so, with the help of his Aunt Julie, Stuart found the photo album put together by his late grandparents, and it only took like 10 minutes to spot a family photo. And it had Charles in it. On the back, it had the names Grandpa, Grandma, Roy, and Charlie, which is what they called Carl. He went to the larger family photo and was able to identify Charles as the young man in the back row on the far right, with his hand held above the head of a man thought to be his brother-in-law, Gerald Kean. So it's believed Charles Webb was wearing the clothes of his nephew John Russell Kean when he was found on Somerton Beach, likely from like hand-me-downs. So after a bit more investigating now, they have located and are in contact with the family. Charles grew up and worked in a family bakery business in Springvale, Victoria. When the bakery closed down, he retrained as an electrical instrument maker.
So are they set on his identity being this
Yes.
Charlie guy?
Yeah. In 1941, he married Dorothy Robertson, a pharmacist and chiropodist. The couple moved into a flat in Bromby Street in South Yarra. Dorothy filed for divorce in 1951 for desertion, and in the divorce papers, she described Charles as violent, threatening, and moody, a man with no particular friends of his own. He wrote many poems. Most of them were on the subject of death, which seemed to be something he was looking forward to. This does kind of tie in with the scrap of paper found in his pocket, um, which could be described as a poetry about death. One day in March 1946, Dorothy came home to their flat to find Charles unwell. She said, "I found him lying in a wet bed, gazing into space," she said in the divorce papers. He could hardly speak and was rambling. The flat reeked of ether, which is an anesthetic, so strong that other tenants complained. So this could be a possible attempt to take his own life. So, as for the causes of death, there's really no definitive answer. His body was too decomposed for the toxicology tests to run for the ether. Abbott has said that the pathologists in the Victorian era were trained that if there was no apparent reason for death, that they would often recommend poisoning. In the 1949 autopsy, it was suspected that there was heart failure due to the poison, though. I have theories about how he died. My first theory: poison is still a strong theory because, in my opinion, there was no clear indication on why his organs were failing. Also, his past attempt to take his own life, the note in his pocket, and it's still possible that other poisons or pills that he could have took for overdosing could have been in his system, even though it didn't show up on the toxicology report because, as we talked about earlier, they only test for commonly accessible drugs. Okay, so second insane theory: Dorothy was a pharmacist and chiropodist, and Jessica was a nurse, so they could have known each other. Dorothy would have access to medications as being a pharmacist, and she would also know what drugs that would show up on basic toxicology reports, as would Jessica being a nurse. Dorothy admitted she left Charles in 1946, and she just had a few shillings to her name, claimed Charles abandoned her in 1947 when he moved. Charles could have been trying to locate Jessica to ask for help finding Dorothy. That would explain Jessica's intense and strange reaction when she was shown the bust. My third theory: Dorothy and Jessica were friends or they knew each other from working in similar fields. Charles cheated on Dorothy with Jessica, got her pregnant with Robin, and so remember the hereditary defects of 1 in 20 million? Dorothy left Charles in 1946. Charles moved out of their apartment in 1947 looking for Jessica to reignite their flame. Jessica is now married, though, doesn't want Charles to ruin or meddle in her life since he seems to be unstable, which, valid. Jessica's a nurse and would have access to lethal drugs that wouldn't show up on basic tox screening, and Jessica overdosed Charles, effectively killing him. Those are my theories. I maybe cut all that out. I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it in.
They're interesting.
So, after decades of speculation, the identity of the man has finally been uncovered. So we know his name, but there are still so many questions and theories about how he died, who he really was, like his connections to everything. Why did he end up in Adelaide? What led to his death? Why did he travel all the way to Adelaide if he was just going to take his own life? What's his connection to the code that he left in the back of the Ruby yacht?
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook at Paranoia Pair Pod. And if you have any suggestions or like ideas that you want us to cover, put them in the comments. But we'll see you next Friday.
Stay spooky.
Bye.
Ma.
Bye.
Ma. 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 Look at this bruise. Do you see that?